this is a brand new course for all of us. And so this is the first batch of this course actually. And this course is part of the Bodhavan initiative, which is called How to Prepare, How to Face Donor Due Diligence. And the second part is relating to how to manage grant contracts end to end. Now, the reason why we came up with this particular course for 5 weeks was essentially our understanding that small, medium organizations not only struggle for funds, but also struggle to handle the due diligence when it comes to any donor wanting to give grant funds. And the second, if donors do give grant funds, the second challenge that we find is that uh, we are we lack the necessary skills to manage the grant contract, with the result that donors who would otherwise have wanted to continue their engagement with you do not do go away to some other grantee rather than us as a repeat kind of a grant. So this is the genesis for this particular course. And this is a very important course because, as you know, we all depend on grant funds for our sustenance as bread and butter for our activities. And the understanding of donor due diligence as well as of managing grant contracts is not one time, it's a continuous uh, process. And more so because of the fact that the complexity around both these subjects have grown considerably. Gone are those days when due diligence was very elementary, donor grant management was fairly simple. Things have changed considerably over the last couple of years. So we need to be prepared both in terms of the due diligence part as well as in terms of executing or managing a grant contract. It's just not execution of program. It's much, much bigger than that, as we will see in the second part. Now, what is the layout for today's presentation? Is basically to understand the donor landscape in India. So we must understand, before understanding the donor, what is the landscape like today and what it is expected to be in the next couple of years. Okay. Then the second area is overview, rationale, importance, process, and being ready for donor due diligence. The third area is the meat of this session, which is basically areas for organizational due diligence. So the institutional areas relating to due diligence is what we are going to cover. And we have compartmentalized all areas related to this institutional due diligence in 8 buckets. Okay, so we will try to cover as many buckets as we can cover today, and that's the layout for today's presentation. So therefore we are going to actually look at the various institutional areas around donor due diligence, and these are 8 numbers that I have tried to summarize them. And each of this bucket is a fairly big bucket, as we will see. Okay, but so a lot of effort has gone in terms of first assimilating what the areas can be, and then probably trying to bring content to each of these areas. And that's what we are going to see. But before that, let's understand what is this donor landscape in this country. And that is what I call as social sector investment in this country. Now, why we want to understand the social sector investment in this country is to understand what is the potential for donor funding or for donor funded projects or social sector development projects in this country. I can tell you the potential is immense, as the numbers will show. And these numbers I have taken from the India Philanthropic Report of 2024 from Bain and Company, which is one authentic data source from where we have been able to kind of cull out information about social sector expenditure or investment. Now, this slide shows you what the estimated investment was in 2023. In our country, there was a total of 23 lakh crores of investment in the social sector as far as the country is concerned. Now, this is about 8.3% of GDP, whereas the Niti Aayog says that our social sector spending to GDP should be 15%. So in their understanding, our spend last year should have been 35 lakhs, against which we have done 23 lakhs. So there's a gap of nearly one third as far as social sector spending is concerned. However, social sector spending is growing at 13% compounded annual growth rate, which is phenomenal. This only shows that the amount of money that is going into social sector, and especially education and health, which are the two big pillars of this investment, is something that is very encouraging. And that is why I say, despite the fact that there is a lot of pessimism around donor funding, it is not, because if you scratch the numbers, you will find that there is a lot of potential. Now, please remember that out of this 23 lakh crore that I have mentioned, 95% is by the government sector. Okay. So the government's own mammoth machinery does a lot of social sector spending, which is all right. Now, what concerns us when it comes to donors and grants is the 5% private sector social sector investment. Now, that 5% social sector investment last year was 1,21,000 crores, as I have mentioned here. And if we were to see the breakdown by category of these 1,21,000 crores, this is how it looks like. CSR spending was about 23%, which is nearly one fourth of the total investment that has been happening. And mind you, this percentage of 23% is growing, in percentage terms over the years. However, what happens in the next 5 years is something that will surprise you a bit. And this amount works out to about 28,000 crores. So our estimation is that CSR funding in this country is closer to between 25 to 30,000 crores, which is a fair number, okay, and should grow based on the fact that the economy is moving from has already moved from 10th to the 5th largest economy and is expected to be the third largest by 2030. The second one is HNI and UHNI. Now, this essentially means family run foundations. Okay. So, the Azim Premji Foundation or such foundations which have been promoted by corporates. Okay. Not out of CSR, but out of their own philanthropic reason and high net worth individuals. So, I have tried to find out what is the definition. There is no specific definition of these people in law. So, we have dwelled on other ways to understand what is the categorization for HNI, UHNI, and VHNI, and that's what I've mentioned down below. Okay, the HNI generally is a person whose net worth is 5 crores plus, and in certain cases, I understand that people are using the 10 CR threshold. As far as the very high net worth individual is concerned, it's between 5 to 25. And the UHNI, there is consensus that it has to be more than 25 CR. Now, this particular category, which includes family businesses, is something where the percentage is 28%. It was 34,000 crores in 2023. The individual giving, which is the retail segment, was at 30%. So, in a certain sense, this was the highest in terms of the percentage of the private sector funding. Again, the fact is that individual funding has doesn't have so much of control as we have in the other three categories, because it's a very big number. So this was 36,000 crores, and the last one was foreign funding, which comes through the FC route, the foreign contribution route, which was about 19% at 23,000 crores. Now, please remember that the foreign contribution or the foreign funding has come down from somewhere close to about 40 crores, 40,000 crores some years back, because of tightening of the FCRA route itself and a lot of other actions that have been taken, which has brought this down to somewhere around 23,000 crores. And this number of 23,000 crores has remained more or less stagnant for the last about 2-3 years. So what emerges is that the family run foundations and the UHNIs and VHNIs are increasingly becoming a big source of philanthropy in this country. Okay. Whereas the other three categories continue to grow. All right. So why I've done this is to make you understand what are the category of donors in this country as far as funding is concerned, funding social sector is concerned. So I'm not going to get into the government funding, which is the government's own machinery and the government's own way of either spending money, most of it, or to grants and aid to states or even to not-for-profit organizations. But that's not what we are looking at. We are looking at these four categories. Okay. Now, what happens in the next 5 years based on this particular slide? What is the estimation for 2028? Again, a very bright picture. From 23 lakh crores, this is estimated to go to 43 lakh crores. And the understanding with the same amount of percentage of 15% of GDP for social sector development, it comes to 57 lakh crores. Again, there's about a 14 lakh crore gap between what the government thinks should be social sector spending, or government means the Niti Aayog as their think tank, and what is estimated to come as 43 lakh crores. However, 43 lakh crores versus 23 lakh crores that happened last year is nearly a 100% increase in social sector spending in this country. Now, the contribution from the private and the government sector would continue to be the same 95 and 5%. However, when we look at the 5%, which from 1,21,000 crores in last year now becomes 2,36,000 crores. This is how the picture is emerging for the category of donors. Very important, because the category of donors is what helps us understand what is the potential for development sector, social development projects, and for us as opportunity, because it's grants that run organizations generally. Okay, so it's very important to have the background information in terms of who are our potential, donors, who are the ones that hold promise. There is a lot of promise as far as growth in social sectors investment, and more particularly in private social sector investment is concerned. There is no question on that. And therefore, one should not get worried as to whether social sector investment by the private sector is going to come down. No, it's not going to come down, as I'm showing you from these numbers. These are not my numbers, but from the Bain report, which is considered to be a fairly good, proxy for what is expected to happen. Now, coming to the CSR funding, which was about 27, 28,000 crores, now this actually becomes 45,000 crores. And it is said that as the economy grows, as corporates do better and therefore generate more profits, this amount from 28 to 45 crores, 45,000 crores is a huge jump. I remember when in 2013, Section 135 was introduced in the Companies Act. The then, the Minister for Corporate Affairs, Rajesh, I mean, what is his pilot son, Sachin, he said that our understanding is that in the next 15 years, the corporate sector investment in social development projects would be to the tune of 50,000 crores. Nobody believed that. Nobody believed that this could be the number that he was talking about. However, as we see, the contribution from corporates under the CSR obligation, please remember, CSR is an obligation. Okay, the corporate social responsibility, you all know, is an obligation on corporates who fulfill or who become eligible for spending on social sector. These are all companies registered or incorporate, not registered, incorporated under the Companies Act. Okay, so this amount from 28 to 30,000 crores will actually uh, increase by 50% to 45,000 crores. So that's a huge potential. But the biggest potential or the growth is expected to be in family foundations or HNI, UHNI. That particular thing, because of the fact that the affluent class in India is going to go up, will be the biggest contributor of philanthropy in this country, which is nearly 50%. So it's actually 45% or nearly half of the philanthropic investment by public private sector is going to come from the HNI, UHNI, and VHNI. Now, this segment is still struggling because they have the money, but they really do not know how to probably select, how to do the due diligence, because the others have some amount of vintage in terms of 15, 20, 30 years. This is a new category of philanthropists or donors, but it has the biggest potential in terms of contribution for social sector projects is concerned. Retail is actually also going to go up. So one fourth, it's actually going to come down from 30% to 25%, but in absolute terms, it's going to be about 60,000 crores. CSR in percentage terms will actually come down from 25 odd percent, one fourth to 19% or one by fifth. Okay. But the absolute numbers will go up because we are looking at numbers going from 1,21,000 crores to 2,36,000 crores. Foreign funding is going to remain more or less stagnant is what the estimation is. So 25,000 crores odd is what is considered to be the FC route funding. Now 25,000 crores is not a small number. Okay, it's a 60% reduction from the highest numbers that we used to see way back in 2010, 11, 12, in the last about 10 years. But it has actually come down by about nearly from 40,000 crores to 25,000 crores, which is nearly 40%. And this will be contributing about 11% of the total private sector donor funding. So you would see that both in terms of the absolute numbers as well as relative numbers, foreign funding definitely is absolute numbers, it's going to be stagnant, but relative numbers, it's going to actually come down from somewhere, as we said, about 19 odd percent to 11%. The three big categories is CSR, family foundations or HNI, UHNI, and retail. This is what is the emerging scenario as far as donors is concerned in this country. So who are our donors in this country? Very clearly, these are the five category of donors that we are looking at. Okay. So these five category of donors: government, family foundations, which is the HNI, UHNI. Okay, because they would work more in some kind of a unison in terms of funding. CSR, individual and foreign contribution. Now, what is common in all this and what brings us to this topic that we are trying to study today is the fact that before these people come with the money in their pocket to give it to us or as not-for-profit organization, they would want to know whether they are giving it to the right organization, through the right cause, to all those areas. So donor due diligence therefore is imperative for all these categories. I'm not going to get into government because that's a totally different ball game. Okay, but we are going to get into family foundation, CSR, and foreign contribution because these are three concrete categories which are employing very strict measures of donor due diligence as far as donors grantee selection is concerned, or deciding whether and where to give their donor funds is concerned. So barring retail, where there is no very standard method for actually the individual to go, except for maybe reference check, the other categories have a fairly formal method of due diligence, is what I want to tell you. So understanding our donor landscape, our kind of spectrum of the donors is very important, and also understanding the potential that the social sector investment itself is offering is very important. And therefore, I am very optimistic that this particular sector is bound to grow, because if the investment is bound to go up by 100% from 1,21,000 crores to 2,36,000 crores, these people will have to bring the money. Okay, CSR, for instance, if we are estimating 45,000 crores, as per the current position for the CSR law, which has changed in 2021, the money has to come to the sector. The money cannot be kept by the CSR corporates. That's what I'm trying to say. So the money will come. Is a matter of how prepared we are to be able to receive the money. Okay, and that's what is the intent for this particular session today. In fact, the intent for the course. So before we get into the institutional areas, which is the meat, as I said, but let's do a couple of slides as as ice breaking, or to understand the holistic nature of what we are trying to get educated about. Now, what are donors looking at before they fund a not-for-profit? And I was able to take out about 6 particular things that is quite common among all donors. One, the cause, the objective, the purpose for which, that's the very critical factor as far as a donor is concerned. What is the purpose? Education, health, skill development, gender equality, okay, what, environment, whatever. So when, where do you find the cause, in law? Is something that I just wanted to say. So the donors would have a cause. Now, if you see the CSR law, the CSR policy lays down the cause. But as far as foreign contribution is concerned, or um, foundations, family run foundations are concerned, there is no kind of very detailed indication as to what causes they will. But when we talk to them, probably we'll be able to understand what are the causes that they are going to promote. Now, where are the causes mentioned as far as law is concerned? The cause, if you know, is mentioned in section 215 of the Income Tax Act. Okay, so the Income Tax Act defines charitable object in section 215. All right. So the section 215 says what is charitable object as far as a charitable organization is concerned. So you remember relief to the poor, medical relief, okay, yoga, education, environment, monument, and general and advancement of general public utility. These are the causes as far as the income tax is concerned. As far as the CSR law is concerned, Schedule 7, which is attached, appended to Section 135 of the Companies Act 2013, is what defines what is the activities that can be done um, under CSR. So can anything be done? No. What is mentioned in Schedule 7, but a liberal interpretation of Schedule 7, but those activities should be particularly there. Okay. Now, as far as FCRA is concerned, they have defined the purpose for which FCRA can be received. And I call it CREAS, CREES, cultural, religious, economic, educational, and social. Now, they haven't defined what is economic or social, okay? Cultural, they haven't defined it, but they have used these words to explain what the nature of activity is permitted under FCRA. Now, as far as GST is concerned, the definition of charitable purpose or charitable activity, they call it, is defined in the GST notification for exemption. If you are fulfilling that, the definition of charitable activity and the other conditions relating to exemption, that's what will guide you in terms of taking a GST registration in case you do some kind of commercial activity or not. Okay. So the charitable activity is defined. It's a much more you know narrower definition of charitable versus the Income Tax Act. And of course, if you are wanting to register yourself on the social stock exchange, then the exchanges have defined what is permitted activities for coming up with a issue of securities on the social stock exchange. Okay. Now, if you see all these various causes as mentioned in law, you will find that they have some kind of a mirroring with the sustainable development goals, which we need to achieve by 2030. But there are variations in the causes themselves as far as these laws are concerned. What I am trying to then say is that the donors will therefore have some little difference in the cause that they will promote. Will they promote all the causes? Like, for instance, if there are social stock exchange, there are 16 activities that can be permitted. Not all can be done. Can all Schedule 7 activities be done by donors? No. But that is the spectrum of the cause that can be promoted when you talk of charitable organizations. Okay. So that's the first thing. So we need to understand when before funding NPOs, the donor would want to know what is the cause that the NPO is actually taking up. Second is transparency. And the word transparency I've just mentioned, see through. Is it like a glass through which I can see everything? Now, whether it's finance, whether it's program, whether it's MIS, whether it's your own compliance, is there transparency in the organization or in the NPO? Now, this transparency will be validated by donor due diligence, but they are looking at transparency as one very important pillar as far as funding is concerned. The third one is safety. Of course, that's very important, safety of their funds. And that's linked to the due diligence directly. Have I done my due diligence to ensure that the safety of my funds is ensured? And that's what is called the fiduciary responsibility. Now, many organizations do not understand that the donors are coming from a certain perspective. They are not here only to give money. They are here to ensure several things. And these are some of the things that they want to ensure because they are on their side, they are responsible. Their staff is responsible for explaining to the donor they did all this before they gave the fund. Okay, so safety of the fund is very, very important. Next is communication, and this sometimes gets lost in terms of our dealing with donors. The interface or the meeting of the donor and donee and the way communication happens, is there a common understanding between the two, is very, very important. Sometimes because of communication not being proper and not being free flow and not being transparent, there is a lot of confusion that happens both on the grantor and the grantee side. So what is important in terms of donors selecting an NPO is what is the kind of language or communication or messaging that is coming from the NPO. And this is the softer skill that is there. And this also needs to be cultivated by the NPO. Then measurable means evidence based. The results are no longer fluid results or amorphous results. Okay, I've just done this activity. Now it's an input output related kind of a project that most donors will say. They'll say, I'll give you this much money. What is the input and what is the measurable output? Evidence based tangible output is what actually is mattering. And if you are able to prove that, if you're able to validate that, then probably your chances of getting of retaining that donor is much, much more. Last is sustainability. Now, when we talk of ESG, when we talk of CSR, when we talk of all kinds of donations, I'm talking of sustainability of that particular engagement. I'm not talking of sustainability from the ESG point of view. I'm saying that the sustainability has to be of the activity or the project that has happened, which means what? It means that the end result has got seeded with the beneficiary or the target audience, as we call it. So the target or for the target audience, the behavior change was moving from X to Y as far as sanitation is concerned, as far as gender equality is concerned, whatever might be the cause. But then is that activity done in such a fashion that it gets seeded for a long period of time in the community, and that's validated through impact assessment. So they are looking not only at measurable results which are at that point of time, but whether that particular result is getting sustainable in the community, because that's the final outcome of that particular activity, okay, or the project. So these are some of the things that donor look at. Now, this you might say is just a sheet or a screen just for understanding. No, it's how your culture should be of the organization to be able to present yourself when you go for donor funding. Okay, so this is what donors look at. Now, when we come to the definition of due diligence, now we are moving to due diligence. Okay, now when we talk of due diligence literally actual means the required carefulness. Okay, why do you need to be careful? Because you need to ensure that you do not end up with any kind of loss. Okay, so that is what is the definition of due diligence as far as literal definition is concerned. So how are you careful in your action is what is due diligence. Now when it comes and due diligence, we do it universally. Don't think that since I'm telling you about due diligence or we are learning due diligence, it's meant only for not for profits. No, it is meant for every activity. It's a universal concept. For the for-profit entities or for the for-profit sector, the due diligence is even more robust and rugged, because it's more important in terms of the return of money to the investor. There, what who's the person who's giving the money? The investor. And the investor wants not only returns, but it also wants the money back. As far as not for profits is concerned, they want returns in terms of social impact, but they don't want the money back, because the money is one way. It's given as trust money. It's not a money for a commercial purpose. So that understanding has to be there. But we must all understand that due diligence is something which is universal, as I have mentioned. Now, when it comes to donor due diligence parlance, when we talk of donor due diligence, and we are moving in that direction now, what is donor due diligence? Basically, it's scrutiny and evaluation of an organization, of a not-for-profit organization, okay, to study their work and to see whether we can select that particular organization as a partner, not as an investor, for profit, relationship. It's a partnership for an engagement. The engagement is a project. Okay. Now, due diligence, as far as donor due diligence in the not-for-profit sector is concerned, it is basically in two parts. One is organizational due diligence, and the second one is programmatic due diligence. Okay. So we have seen that donor due diligence is basically a scrutiny, a study, an evaluation for coming to a decision whether we will want to partner for an engagement with this particular organization or not. Now, when we do donor due diligence in the not-for-profit space or the social sector development space, these are the two broad categories of due diligence. One is the organizational due diligence. And please remember, the first three sessions, as far as uh, uh, this particular course is concerned, is on organizational due diligence. So our topic is organizational due diligence when we are doing donor due diligence. We are the second component of donor due diligence is the programmatic due diligence. But we are not doing programmatic due diligence because that is specific to a proposal. All right. But we are doing organizational due diligence, which is cross-cutting across all not-for-profits. They can be any not-for-profit. It can be for any kind of project, but or a proposal, but that will be cross-cutting across all organizations. So organizational due diligence will apply equally for a medium, for a small, or for a large organization. That is what we are going to, what we need to understand. Now, how is the connection, or how is the donor-donee engagement set up? So what is the donor? The donor is your donor. Donee is you as the grantee or a grantor-grantee engagement. How does it normally happen? So there are four routes through which this kind of an engagement happens. We are talking of an engagement. An engagement means that we are partnering for a project or for projects, whatever you might say, or a program. There is difference in terms of connotation of projects and programs, but at this stage, we're not getting into that. Now, so the donor might get in touch with the organization, or the organization may get in touch with the donor, vice versa. All right. So these are two ways in which the donor-donee engagement can get set up. The third one is the donor may, engage an external agency to find the right kind of grantees with whom we can work. Okay. And that is where the slide that we saw, what donors look for before selecting an NPO. So they may not want to do that work themselves. They might say, well, let's have an external agency for having to do that. The last one is that organizations apply for proposals. They may be expression of interest, or they may be request for proposals. They are formally available in the public domain by the donors. So instead of a kind of a standalone or a direct relationship that is established between the grantor and the grantee, this is a more formal way of inviting organizations for applying and then getting selected for an engagement. So how do you get into an engagement is these four routes that are available to us. All right. Now moving on to the rationale. So we have seen what donors look at. Why does due diligence happen? Okay, so that is what we are trying to now understand. Now, donors want to understand and determine the suitability for the grant award. Is the alignment, is the cause, is the kind of expectation that we have as a donor, is this organization matching? Then that's what is the word suitability. So why due diligence? Why the what is the objective or the rationale for due diligence, for donor due diligence, is to see whether this particular grantee is suitable for a grant award from our side. And therefore it is also, it's not just for the donor, but it's also for you to understand what is the donor's expectation, what is the cause that they promote, what is the alignment that is there between the donor and you. It's very, very important. While I am actually talking on from these particular few points that are there in this slide, I am talking from the donor's side. Okay, what is the suitability of this particular organization? Uh, the donor due diligence, the one major objective, as we had seen also in the previous slide, in terms of safety, is to mitigate risk. Now, there are all kinds of risks that can be there. There can be reputational risk, not to the grantee, but to the donor also. So there are a lot of risks that are there. Can we, why do we do donor due diligence? So that we can reduce or mitigate the risk. Okay, we can manage the risk through due diligence to understand that whether we are exposed to a lot of risk, or whether we have we our due diligence is throwing up a conclusion that this the risk that this organization has as a grantee are reasonable, and therefore in terms of mitigating risk for the donor, it is sufficient level of mitigation. Okay, because donors are very, very concerned about their reputation, about anything which tarnishes their image. Now, the third one is, are the funds utilized effectively for the intended purpose? So effectiveness means the outcomes with the existing funds, were they achieved in the most optimal manner? Okay, one is called efficiency, which is the way you do the input output. But once the output is there, whether the output in terms of quantity and quality was good enough with the funds and for the defined purpose. So why due diligence? Because you want to understand whether this organization will be able to deliver on the intended purpose or cause, and how effectively it will be able to deliver. The next one is remove bias. So organization donors do due diligence because they want it to be an objective assessment. They don't want it to be a subjective assessment, and therefore the bias comes in terms of somebody having an understanding of an organization, and therefore taking a view that this organization is not good. It's in a way a very good thing, because the organizational due diligence or the donor due diligence, we are now talking of organizational due diligence, mind you, and that is what we are studying now. We are not going to do programmatic due diligence, as I have already mentioned. So we are doing, when we are not doing organizational due diligence, we might have all kinds of, or people in our organization as a donor may have all kinds of views about a particular organization. Now, what due diligence does is to ensure that those biases, if there are positive or negative, are removed through an objective mechanism of due diligence. Now, the next one is more soft. It helps to build trust. Okay. Uh, you then feel more comfortable. The donor feels slightly more comfortable after the due diligence or during the process of due diligence. Well, the risk is at a very reasonable level. There is a lot of transparency. Okay. The organization is capable of delivering. The assessment about that organization in among other stakeholders is good. So this due diligence helps to create that trust and also lay out the expectations. Now, the due diligence also brings up certain kind of observations or findings which become the expectation from the donors, from as far as the grantee is concerned. And it's very good to lay out the expectations. So the donor due diligence will throw up findings and observations, which in a certain sense is the expectation from this grantee to improve by the end of, I mean, which may not be a very risky matter, but the donor would want those expectations to be met as you move in the grant contract. Okay. As far as the grantee is concerned, why due diligence? And that is the brighter side that I want to give you as, as not for profits. What does it do? Why should you go through due diligence? Most people will say, oh, it's a headache. It's such a problem. The donor will come 3 days, they will spend. Please remember, on the positive side, on the flip side, this donor due diligence gives you an opportunity to showcase yourself and all aspects of organizational due diligence that you are able to display and validate is nothing but showcasing you to the outside world, not to just that donor, but to the entire spectrum of donors who might be interested in you. So that is the biggest rationale for due diligence as far as a not-for-profit is concerned. Donors may have their own idea about not doing due diligence, or the reasons for due diligence, or the rationale for due diligence, which is their money, which is their outcomes, which is their risk, which is their reputation, which is expectations, which is trust. But from our point of view, what does due diligence help do us? It is a very big visibility tool. It's a very big reputational tool in terms of showcasing ourselves. But at the same time, it helps us to understand and overcome our shortcomings. So let's look at it as some kind of audit in a certain sense. And most people will say audit is not good. So also due diligence is not good. But that view has to change, because without due diligence, no donor is going to give you any funding. And if you do well on the due diligence, and if you do well in the grant contract, it's fairly clear that the donor will support you, because donors are also looking for credible and credit worthy organizations. So if what donor due diligence does is also exposes you in terms of your shortcomings, which otherwise we might never be able to understand. Why due diligence? Because this is a scrutiny, this is an evaluation. In a certain sense, this is an audit to come up with some outlier situations or outlier findings, which then helps you to improve yourself and showcase yourself in the next due diligence. That's the rationale, for as far as I am concerned, as a not for profit. And that's the most positive side of donor due diligence. It's not that we will get the money, it will give you an opportunity to tell your story to the external world. That's how you'll have to look at the organizational due diligence. Now, coming to data collection for due diligence, so that it gives you an idea as to what are the resources that donors are looking at when they are doing your due diligence, and therefore helps you to understand whether all those resources you are doing well or not. One is desk review through secondary data. So they may go to your website, they may go to other, stakeholders, or other methods in terms of understanding whatever other data or information is available. There could be many secondary data available about your publications, about your reports, about your visibility, which will help them in their desk review. So they're not coming to you, they are doing their own research sitting on the desk. Then the second one for organizational due diligence is data obtained from organizations directly. And this means that we should have all this information and data ready for providing to the donor. Now, if you have gone through donor due diligence, you must have seen that donors follow what is called as a checklist. And we will see a few of the checklist in session 3, just to give you an idea as to what is the kind of bandwidth of donor due diligence. Okay, so all donors have their own. There is no standard checklist. A credit rating agency may have a certain way because they are more corporate. A corporate might have its own way and may also ask you for certain information which is not even available or not even possible in law. That's okay. And therefore, I want to tell you something, that it is not as though we are on the, on the receiving end. The donors and their external agencies are also not fully up to date. and therefore this gives us an opportunity to be fully up to date. So I know a lot of checklists where information is required or is asked for which information cannot be provided because the law itself has changed. And therefore, I want to tell you that organizational due diligence, the areas of institutional areas of due diligence for an organization, please be mindful of all changes that happen. Only then you will, because those changes since 2020 last 3 to 4 years are sweeping changes. Okay, they are changes which nobody can even understand. All right, so the data obtained from the organization. So you might actually, the donor might come back to you and say, well, please provide organizational data. I'm talking about the organizational or institutional data, not talking about the proposal per se. Then there is another way that donors have started asking information, and that's what is called as the self-assessment checklist. So they'll give you a checklist which has a set of questions on various parameters. Okay, and they will say, well, please answer these questions and also attach supportings to substantiate your answer. In a way, they are giving you a question paper and you have to answer. And they are the ones then who are going to see whether your answers are matching with your documents or not. So I've seen a lot of these self-assessment checklists. Instead of asking you for data, they are asking you for answers to questions. All right. So this is very, very important to understand that how do you answer to those to the checklist is very, very important. Even the data obtained from organization will be in the form of a checklist, but this is a self-assessment checklist. What is your answer or your understanding? That helps them not only to understand the data but also to understand the culture, the level of comprehension, the communication of that organization. All right, and therefore, it's very important to see how the self-assessment checklist is filled up. Now, scrutiny of audit, those are all other, these are mostly, uh, desk reviews or audit reports of past, your own audit reports or your past donors, if those have conducted any donors audits. So because that will give them an opportunity to see findings, observations, red flags. That's the easiest way of doing of finding that out, because somebody else has done that work for the potential donor. So they will do a lot of scrutiny of audit reports, including your audit report, because that's also, please remember, your audit report as a statutory audit report is also issued by a third party. Okay, your statutory auditor, of course he's your statutory auditor, but he's an independent practitioner. So audit reports give these organizations, these donors, a lot of understanding on organizational compliance and therefore on organizational due diligence. On-site visit and meeting the top leadership, that's one other way. So, and the last one is field visit. So the last one is basically for program, but the one before that, point number E, is for organizational due diligence. So when somebody comes for organizational due diligence, the A to D is basically offline or off-site, and the E is if they want to come on site. So in the A to D, a lot of information may be called for, and a lot of supplementary information may be called from you later once you send the checklist, or maybe from other people, maybe even from other, your portals, your statutory auditors. So you have to be very careful. What we do at times is to kind of check all these details from the statutory auditor, or talk to the statutory auditor for 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, to get a pulse of what his understanding is of organizational due diligence. And you get a lot of leads from such interactions with statutory auditors, where they will tell you what is the level of transparency, organization, due diligence understanding, in although they might themselves be, faulting at certain places. I'm not saying that is not the case, but at least we get a lot of ready hand information from them. So please remember that we have to, one needs to also guard our other stakeholders who might provide leads or information to these donors. Now, as far as data collection and evaluation is concerned, this can be done by the donor staff, or it can be done by an external agency. A lot of organizations give it to external agencies because external agencies is considered to have people who would be better aware of what are the up-to-date changes as far as compliances are concerned. And for organizational due diligence, the compliance factor is the biggest factor as far as due diligence is concerned. Having gone from understood what the documentation can be in terms of sources of resources or material sources from where due diligence can be due diligence inferences can be culled out. Let's understand what is the process of due diligence. The process begins once a proposal is submitted against an UI or a standalone proposal. Now, organizational due diligence doesn't happen, like an audit or an annual audit. No, it happens when a donor wants to give funds to you. And this is what is called as the pre-award stage or a pre-award activity in the grant management life cycle. We will see grant management in session 4, and we will see the life cycle of a grant. Every grant has a life cycle, and this particular aspect relating to inviting a proposal as well as inviting information is the pre-award stage before the award. That is what is why it's called pre-award. Now it's conducted once before an engagement with a particular not-for-profit. So one, it's against a particular RFP or EOI or a standalone proposal that might have been asked for, and before the grant contract has been awarded. That's called the award stage as far as the grant management life cycle is concerned. So this process, this time period between asking for a proposal, getting a proposal, and selecting not-for-profit for a particular grant is what is the due diligence period. That is what we want to say, and this is the process. Now, this involves detailed scrutiny for various aspects of compliance that we are going to actually see. Now, there is a definition. There are two words, what is called as hard due diligence and soft due diligence. The hard due diligence is quantitative data. So your financials, okay, your fund flow, your cash position, your bank statements, they are all quantitative data. That's called hard due diligence. But when I talk to you, when I talk to other stakeholders, that's qualitative data. And that's what is called as soft due diligence. So I mentioned to you when I talked to the auditor, that's soft due diligence. And when I look at your financials, audited financials, that's the hard due diligence. And at times we tend not to give importance to a lot of things that these donors keep asking. What I have realized in the process of due diligence is that no homework is done by small, medium organizations prior to due diligence. In fact, these organizations think that due diligence is a burden. But please remember, this is a way of showcasing yourself. Now, that is the change in attitude or mindset that you will have to bring that will help you to get grants. As long as you think that due diligence is a burden, you will not get grants. We have seen the kind of potential for social sector funding from the private sector in this country. But all the time, small, medium organization, nobody gives us grant. Why will they give you grant when they don't think you are worthy of grants? And this is precisely the preparation for that due diligence. And I'm not even saying, let me say a disclaimer here. I'm not saying whatever I will show you in these presentations, you have to do it from tomorrow. But plan it out. Plan it out over a period of 2 years. Say, these are the things in the next 2 years that we are going to fix and keep ready. If not today, at least after 1 year, we will be better prepared for organizational due diligence and telling the donor, I am not good in program. I am also good in terms of my institutional capacity and capabilities. That's what is becoming more important because donor staff are also under lot of scrutiny. They will not want to take any risk just because there is a lot of connect that you have with the community. That's very good. But your own standing as an institution, how strong it is equally important. Now we go to our meat of this particular session. But before that, if there are any questions, anyone wants to ask a question, I will give that uh, uh, give it give 2 minutes now here if there's any question up to now. So what we have done, just a very quick recap, is to understand the donor landscape for this country, understand what is due diligence, what are the components of due diligence, what are the common ways of engagement of donors with the grantees. Okay, so we have then done what's the rationale for due diligence. It's the rationale for due diligence is both for the grantor and grantee. That's the beauty of due diligence. Then we have seen how due diligence resources are culled out by donors. We have seen what is the process of due diligence, and we have also seen what donors look for before funding. They look for transparency, they look for the purpose, they look for risk, they look for the the right alignment, as we call it. So all those things are important. Now you might think this is all language. No, this is not language. This language has to be converted into your action and your culture. Okay, so we are here up till now, but let me know uh, Yeah, so Preetham has asked, please let us know the documents that are necessary for the due diligence process. I'm going to share a few checklists, anonymous checklists, and therefore you will then find what are the documents. But before that checklist, please be with me in these 2, 3 sessions, or the third session we'll do checklist. But before that, if you are with me, these 2 sessions will bring out the checklist automatically. Okay, you will get the PPT and you will get the recording link after the session. Is there any question? If there is, please raise your hands or unmute and ask me. Otherwise, we can move on to our session, uh, to the section relating to areas around organizational due diligence. Please remember, I am doing organizational due diligence. We are not doing programmatic due diligence, but the due diligence of the organization per se for taking a call. The program is at this stage not in question. The organization is in question. All right. So these are the 8 areas that I have, bucketed all aspects of organizational due diligence by donors based on my experience, my expertise, and what we have been seeing as far as donors are concerned. I'm not saying this is all exhaustive, but we have tried to make it as comprehensive as possible. Now, the first area of due diligence, institutional due diligence, is around constitution or the constitutional aspect relating to due diligence. Now, whenever you must have faced a due diligence, the first question that is asked to you is that how are you constituted? Now, I can also tell you that uh, a lot of organizations where due diligence. So one of the things that I will want to tell you is, please have a point of contact, and that's the kind of tips that we are going to give you later on session 3. But one must have a nodal person or a point of contact, even if we are small or medium, who is the go-to person for organizational due diligence. Otherwise, the donor will never be able to get the right picture. In fact, they will get the wrong picture, because a lot of us in the organization would have no clue as to what the donor is asking and what we are replying. And those are all negative marking for us. So I would suggest that one person, and I don't know whether it's the chief functionary or whosoever it can be, at times our understanding of chief functionary itself is very questionable. All right. And I'm not critical about anybody. Please, I'm not critical, and I'm not, trying to say anything. But what I'm trying to only say is that there are major gaps. Now, when we talk of constitutional related as an area for organizational due diligence, is the first thing that they look at. So, how are charitable organizations, or how is anybody who wants to do charitable work in this country? How are they set up as organizations in the laws? Now, we are talking of constitution. We are talking of constitution. So if I want to start not for profit or charitable work, then what is it? In what form or entity can I do it? And in India, as per the applicable laws, there are three types of entities in which not charitable activity can be done. One is what is called as society, the second is trust, and the third is a Section 8 company. Okay. Now, I have mentioned that each type of this entity has its own unique features. And you will have to decide at the time of constitution what features each of these are offering is what is convenient for you. Now, as far as law is concerned, all these three entity types are recognized. Although in terms of perception of people about each of this, there is difference. In terms of superiority, inferiority, we are not getting into that detail. But as far as law is concerned, it recognizes each of these type of entities uniformly, not only in terms of constitution, but also in terms of compliance. However, it's for us, like for instance, as I said, they have all unique features, like a society in terms of, constitution. uh, it will have a minimum requirement of 7 members to come together. Can you get 7 members? Will it be a state society or will it be a all India society? And if it's an all India society, will you be able to get members from outside the state to be able to call it an all India or a national society? All that is something that you would want to say, or will you say that as a founder I would want to have less number of people, and therefore society may not be the right. So there is no right or wrong. I am not commenting on that. What I am saying is each of these forms of organization has its own set of features. Now they are recognized uniformly in all laws. So the society is, as far as society is concerned and trusts are concerned, these are the ones on which both the state and the central government legislate, all right, as a concurrent subject, as a concurrently. So as far as society is concerned, whereas you have the Societies Registration Act of 1860 governing society constitution, there are state specific acts which are there, and I can tell you most states have their own state laws for societies. Okay, so those state laws for societies will prevail to the extent that they are making those changes to the Societies Registration Act. So you have to look at your state societies registration act for purposes of this particular form of organization. All right. As far as trust is concerned, it's the Indian Trust Act 1882. And in many states, at least a dozen states, many states don't have Trust Act, their state trust act, but a lot of states have their trust act. Some trust acts are are enforced with a lot of enthusiasm, some less. But if there is no state act for trust, it is the Indian Trust Act 1882 that is by default recognized as the act for trust. Let me tell you that the Indian Trust Act 1882 is basically meant for private trusts. It's not meant for public trust. But what is said is that by default, whatever is the provision in the Indian Trust Act 1882 is something that should be followed for a public charitable trust. Now, you can understand that states where there are no trust acts and no charity commissioners, and every document that relates to a trust is required to be filed only with the sub-registrar, and that too also very few documents, the level of confidence or perception about that form of organization will be less. Is that the perception in law? No. The perception by and large of people is what it is. And that's coming from the looseness or uh, toughness of the legislation governing that form of organization. The third one is the Section 8 company, is the Section 25 company under the 1956 Companies Act, and now called the Section 8 company for not-for-profit company incorporated under the Companies Act of 2013. Please remember, the trust is not registered. It's the trust deed that is registered. Trust as such does not have any standing. A society is constituted and registered because it gets an incorporation certificate from the society's registrar. Please understand that very clearly. And as far as the Section 8 company is concerned, you definitely get the uh, the license under Section 8 first, and then you get the certificate of incorporation for you to be able to start your activities as a charitable company. Now, I mentioned that each of these types of entities has its own unique features. We are not getting into that because that becomes a separate session altogether. But you can find out in terms of minimum numbers, who can be the founder, what is kind of reporting, what about the Stamp Act, what is the kind of reporting that is required to the Constitution Authority. All that are many of the differences that are there. But are those differences recognizing them in the other acts differently? The answer is no. The difference may be in terms of perception, as I said. Now, here we are talking of public charitable or religious come charitable institutions. Yeah. So all our discussion is not around private trusts, which definitely will not get exemptions and where no donors would generally give. And we are not talking of religious institutions, which are 100% religious. We are talking of public charitable organizations, and we are talking of religious come charitable organizations, where the religious component in the organization's total work is not more than 5%. All right, that's what is called as a religious come charitable organization, institution. Okay, I want to also mention here that this is the constitution related area that we are talking of. Does the constitution itself give you benefits? The answer is no. And therefore, one has to understand the constitution and subsequent registrations or approvals are two separate things, are completely two separate things. So the moment you have set up a Section 8 company, okay, under the Companies Act, for instance, will you get will you be able to get tax exemption from the income tax authorities? The answer is no. You will have to go to that authority for being able to get registration or approval to get that benefit. The benefit will not get accrued just because of constitution. Similarly, can you get FC receipts once you are registered as a Section 8 company? No, you will have to get either a prior permission or a registration if and when you are eligible for being able to get foreign contribution. So at times, many people do not understand the distinction between registration and benefit or, privilege. I call that privilege because that kind of thing is available only for not-for-profit organizations. This kind of privilege of tax exemption is not even available to individuals. So, but that's not automatic. If and when we follow conditions laid down for getting that benefit or privilege. Now, the next one is the documents relating to registration or incorporation. So societies get registered, companies get incorporated, trust deeds get registered, trust don't get anything. The trust gets its recognition through the trust deed. Now, I want to also tell you that this particular area of due diligence is so important and it is given very little attention by even the chief functionary because they think once done, it's done and dusted. And when the donor looks at or their third party agency looks at those documents, there is so much of mistake in those documents or you know the connection is not there between the documents or the requirement relating to compliance with the documents, the constitutional document is not there and nobody looks at that. So when we are talking of the incorporation documents, I am talking of the memorandum of association and the rules and regulations or bylaws for society. How many of us look at beyond the certificate of incorporation as a society? Nobody. Who looks at the memorandum of association? Nobody. Is the memorandum of association complete? Are the rules and regulations, especially the bylaws, complete? Are they covering what is required in them as far as the State Societies Act is concerned? Nobody looks at that. Okay. Similarly, for trust deed, is the trust deed complete in terms of covering most of the activities? Now, I see trust deed where the trust got registered, and subsequently a lot of people said that so many of these clauses that should have been done for running the trust, you have not done. The board approved the trust, those points, just signed it and kept it along with the trust deed. That's not compliance. That doesn't mean that this is something which is available for public. That's what I'm actually referring to. So very much of importance or due importance has to be given. It's only when there's a due diligence that, as I said, your shortcomings. It's also an opportunity to know your shortcomings, and you have to overcome the shortcomings with open arms, not with thinking that this is something as a mistake that is being. As far as the Section 8 company is concerned, it's the memorandum and articles of association that have to be that are the incorporation documents. Now, basically, these documents as our charter, it talks about our objects, the cause that we are standing for, okay, the rules that we will follow for procedure for this particular entity to operate, and therefore these incorporation documents should be complete. Now, in point number C, I've tried to just capture a few of the mandatory provisions. So what is your name? What is the organization's name? What is the geography? Is it a state? Is it for a state? Is it beyond the state? Is it national? And is the constitution justifying the geography being national or state? At times I see trusts that have been set up where they'll say we will work in a particular district, and that organization is working in several states, and they have not amended their geography or their operation clause. That's what I'm actually referring to. So the general body and the governing body, which is basically your governance related clauses, they have to be very clearly spelled out. Who, what, when, all those things, powers and duties of these people, because these are what are called as holding the fiduciary responsibility for this organization. And at the end of the day, these are the people who will be held accountable if the donor finds that something wrong has happened. So are we making or ensuring all provisions are included in our incorporation documents for the governance to be of top class? Accounts, audit, banking, dissolution, irrevocability as far as trust is concerned. So we find that a lot of these, I mean, these are some of the mandatory provisions that I have taken out, but these are at least the major mandatory provisions that are there. I tell you, many of these constitution documents, especially of small, medium organizations who have paid very little attention, or who have copied these documents from somewhere several years back when they got incorporated, they haven't looked at these documents. And when a donor due diligence happens, so many holes are punched into these documents that the first point or the first step in the ladder for due diligence, they fail. That's why I'm saying very important that the constitution documents are up to date and complete. This is not just to say this. This is for you to tomorrow or on Monday open your constitution documents, have them all in a sequence, see that all provisions that need to be in those constitution documents are there. If they are not there, call for a meeting, get the ratification, file it wherever it needs to be filed. Now, this is the one that we have done up till now is the document preparation. Now comes to the registration of the constitutional documents. As far as trust is concerned, if there is no specific state trust act, it's with the sub-registrar default, and the sub-registrar has hardly any understanding about, or the office of the sub-registrar more particularly, has hardly any understanding of what needs to come in a trust deed, because it is registered just like any other deed or agreement. So it's that all those points indicate that why trust is not respected in terms of the perception is what I'm actually giving you a hint. Although I cannot say this will be accepted and that will not be. All of them will be accepted because in the eyes of law, they are all recognized. Now, as far as a society is concerned, the society has to be registered with the charity commissioner or the registrar of societies or any authority which has been designated or the SDM office, whatever is the mechanism that is there. Please remember that the entire document has to be registered. If subsequent changes that you make also need to be registered. Okay. As far as the company is concerned, it is registered with the registrar of companies of that state. Now, earlier the Section 8 license for for forming or getting a Section 8 license to do charitable work, which is the first condition. That's not the case for a private company, but for a not-for-profit company under the Companies Act, you first need to get a Section 8 license. And the same earlier it was with the regional director, now it is with the state ROC. And then you have to convert and you'll have to then proceed with the certificate of incorporation. Okay, and that gives you the number, the SIN number, the company identification number. That's your number as far as a Section 8 is concerned. So that's the registration part. Now I see a lot of the trusts that get registered in the sub-registrar office, and no number is assigned, or even if the number is assigned, it is not mentioned as registration number. Sometimes even the date is difficult to identify when was it registered, and organization pay very little attention. So when I ask them, what's the registration number on your trust deed? The societies will get a certificate of registration, which will actually have the date and the number, and so also the Section 8 company. The major challenge for trust deeds is, have you got the registration number and the date of registration identified on the trust deed? It's very, very important. In many cases, these organization chief functionaries come back to us and say, well, I think this might be the number because it's put somewhere on the stamp paper, and they will say this is our registration number, although there is no mention of the registration number as such, or in under the hand and seal of the registrar, sub-registrar, deputy registrar, saying that this is the registration number with which I have registered, nor the book number, nor nothing is there at times. And the organization is also not able to give a foolproof answer to that particular question. Now, please remember this is registration and then subsequently is modification. So as our organization grows and complexities increase and changes, dynamism increases, and we need to make changes in our constitutional document, there is modification. Now, the compliance for modification is very, very important. So it's the compliance with modification to your object clause, to your territory, to your other things, or to any particular matter related to your other rules and regulations, or addition to your MOA in terms of your objects or your name itself or your geography. That's all modification, and that has to be an addendum to the main incorporation documents. These need to be filed with the constitutional related authorities, so with the registrar, with the ROC, or with the sub-registrar as an addendum, but it has also to be filed with other authorities. For instance, if there's a modification of the objects, then you have to file the modification through a form with the income tax authority within 30 days. Otherwise, that modification is not valid or you are in default. Similarly, if you modify your name, your address, your objects, then you need to inform the FCRA, form FC 6A and 6B, where you have to inform them within 45 days of such changes that have been resolved by the competent authority. So at times we find that the modification has been made, the minutes have been made, minutes also not very properly made, but those modifications have not been affected either by way of addendum, or even if it has been done, it has not been recorded with the appropriate authority. That is what I want to tell you. Because not due at the time of incorporation, some importance was given, but subsequently when changes are made, we have not tried to see what this modification will affect, whether it will affect the constitutional authority, but whether it will affect other authorities also, because we do not understand the other laws. That is what I want to clearly say. The next one is, for many organizations, especially societies, in many of the states, there is a renewal provision. There could be trust renewal also in some states, but the renewal is mostly what I have seen is for societies. Now, at times, because we are not fully aware, the renewal doesn't happen. So you may get a renewal for requirement, your registration for a period of 3 years or 5 years, and you have to get it renewed within that period of 5 years and get the renewal of your registration. Generally, the certificate of incorporation for companies is perpetual, but and also except for a few states, the trust deed might get renewal, but mostly it is not. But societies is where I have seen that the registrar of societies or the specific state societies act does require that the renewal should happen. This I have seen more specifically for northeastern states. Now, I want to complete this constitution related area by saying that the vintage of an organization does matter. How old that organization is important. Okay. But but I will caveat that by saying it's not how important, how old that organization or the vintage of an organization. It is also dependent on how compliant it has been in terms of its constitutional requirements with that vintage or with that number of years of existence. It's very, very important. So with that, we complete the constitutional related, and I come to the second area, which is what is called as compliance. Now, this is one area where we get a lot of problems. Okay. And please remember the compliance related complexities in law for not for profit has gone up at least 2 to 3 times in the last 2 3 years. So, and more important than that is the fact that the changes that are happening so regularly that it becomes impossible to keep track of the changes. That's adding to the complexity of compliance. Okay. Now, the compliance related area, I have two parts to this. And this is point number two. And there is this point number A and point number B, as I had shown you earlier. Here it is. So when we are talking of compliance, which is point number two, statutory and regulatory, we will talk in two ways. One is registration and approval related for your organization. Now, you may be any type of organization, but the registration and approval is uniformly applicable to all the three types of entities. The B part is compliance, and those again is bifurcated into registration related, the registration that you have taken, and the constitution related, which is point number one. So the statutory regulation, registration or approval related compliances and your own existence or constitution related compliance is the B part where this subdivision is there. Okay. Now I come to, and here if you see there are at least 15 types of registration or approvals that a not-for-profit organization has to get. Now, we have seen that whether we were a trust, whether we were a society, or whether we were a Section 8 company, all right, the matter ends once you get your registration, your incorporation done, and you have the certificate or you have the number. On a trust deed, you don't get a certificate separately. You may get one, you can also get one, by getting it from the sub-registrar that this trust was. I've seen that also. A lot of people do get a certificate or some kind of a documentation which says this trust deed was registered on this date. It's always good to do that. Now, coming to the registration and approvals, and as I said, there could be 10 to 15 types of registration and approvals for a not-for-profit. You please don't get scared by this. What I have told you is that wherever possible, try to get the registration and approval to the maximum possible extent. Here in this presentation, I am going to cover the registrations uh, in a more or less a 360-degree kind of a coverage, okay? A complete 0 to 100 kind of a continuum. But you need to understand what are the registrations and approvals that are required for a not-for-profit. The first one is, of course, the Income Tax Act. So we saw when we got constituted, did we get the income tax exemption automatically? Answer was no. That is what we saw. Or for that matter, any kind of benefit, the answer was no. We just got the charitable badge, the badge of being a charitable institution. Now, if we want our income from religious and charitable purpose to be exempt from income tax, and that's what is the biggest privilege, I call it privilege, that you have as a charitable organization. You need to get yourself registered. Now from 1/4/2021 there is a new regime of registration, and the concept of perpetual registration has been abolished. Okay, that is no longer available. So you, what are the, what gives you the, how does the tax exemption benefit come to you when you get yourself registered as a 12AB entity or an 1023C entity? Okay. Uh, so if you were to get your tax exemption, you will be within the sections 11 to 13 of the Income Tax Act. And section 12 says that you will give the income tax benefit only when you get registered under 12AB for a charitable organization. What is a charitable organization? Those organizations which are pursuing the charitable object in section 215 of the Income Tax Act. Now, this registration, okay, has a definite period of validity. Okay. Uh, that is 5 years. All right. If it is a provisional registration, then it is 3 years. Now, there is so much confusion, and the government's income tax department and the CBDT has compounded that confusion in terms of this, 12AB. Sometimes people who got regular registration for 5 years, the word provisional was mentioned, and knowing that it was, thinking that it was provisional, they applied for regular again, whereas they were not supposed to, because the department subsequently clarified that the word provisional was wrongly mentioned. So you please see your registration certificate in terms of for how many assessment years is this certificate valid. Okay. Now donors will not ask you 12AB registration. They will say, please provide me form number 10AC. They don't understand 12AB actually. So they'll say 10AC de do humko. Okay. That's the form for getting the 12AB registration that will give you the 10 is section 11 to 13 income tax exemption status. Let's be very clear. अब जो 12AB registration है, और it was actually re-registration. It was not a registration. It was only provisional registration for new charitable entities. For existing entities which were already doing charitable work on 1/4/2021, it was a revalidation or re-registration. They are getting you into their, their trap now, because there was no central database of not-for-profit organizations prior to 2021. Now the CPC has the complete database. So you are under scanner. Now, the 10A form is the form which talks about the objects that you will pursue. What I want to clearly tell you is that please be clear what objects you have selected in your 10A. Most organizations, you don't even know what Form 10A is because it was filled by somebody. And what objects were selected, God alone knows. So only when we ask them to go to their portal and say, please download your Form 10A, is when they come to know their objects. And in many cases, some of the objects that they are the main objects have not been selected. And please remember the 12AB registration is for the objects that you have selected in your 10A form and has a bearing in terms of what donors will look at. So donors might look at medical relief or relief to the poor or environment. Okay. And they will first, because in the Form 10AC for 12AB registration, the object is not mentioned. The object is mentioned in your form, has to be selected in your Form 10A. And you have to follow those objects when you do your activities. So what I'm trying to say is that your charter, which has your objects, your 10A form, which has your objects, and the objects which the donor wants you to pursue, there has to be symmetry, because at some point of time through artificial intelligence and data analytics, this particular thing is going to be monitored and scanned by the income tax authorities. Please remember, none of the enforcement bodies for not for profits are sympathetic to not for profits. Let us be very clear on that. And I'm not commenting, I don't want to say anything. We are not here for debating. I'm only saying that no default or no intentional default or an unintentional default is not very sparingly looked at by the department. They are fairly ruthless about it. Okay. So we have to be more than doubly careful when we are filling, filing, addressing, answering. And unless we are aware of what the law says, broadly at least, we will not be able to understand. So I said, so for we are talking of the income tax law correctly, and I am talking about the registration for getting the income tax exemption, and that is where the 12AB registration will give you the exemption, and that is where many donors will say, please give us the registration, because without that, the law that governs those donors does not permit them to give you donation. That's the second part. So you will not get your income as exempt, but they will also not be able to give you the money because they are bound to see that they give the money to a 12AB registered entity. अब second category, so ये जो नया regime 1/4/2021 से आया, it had two regimes. One is the 12AB regime, which is the charitable object that we saw, section 215, and we had 1023C entities also, the ones which were approval or non-approval cases, which were doing educational work or medical or health related institutions. Those are the two kinds of activities that are permitted for 1023C entities. Now, please remember that in this act, in this Finance Act of 2024, these two entities or these two regimes, the first regime 1023C and the second regime 12AB, have been merged from 1/10/2024. इसका मतलब, if after 1/10/2024 anybody wants to do 1023C as an approval category, they will not be able to do that. They will be able to get only 12AB registration. So please be mindful of that. हो सकता है donor आपसे 1023C even after 1/10/2020. But please remember, you will continue to hold the 1023C approval till the time it is valid. So suppose अगर आपको 3 साल पहले 1023C entity 2021 में मिला, it is up to 26-27, it will be valid. There is no sunset clause there. It will not say that this thing gets over. But no new registration under 1023C from 1/10/24, because you will now have to go to 12, section 11, 12, 13 regime. Please understand that. 1046 entities, which are basically set up by government. 35 basically colleges, universities, scientific, social, and statistical research institutions. Some of the donors, if you see their checklist, they're still asking 35 AC approval. Now, 35 AC approval was where you could get 100% exemption, provided you as a grantor got the 35 AC for a specific project. Please remember that this 35 AC was abolished way back in 2016 and is no longer available from 1/4/2018. But I see a lot of checklists, several checklists I have seen where donors are saying, please tell her whether you are 35 AC registered or not, approved or not, whereas that particular section is abolished. So I'm not trying to say that this all green on the donor side. It should be greener on our side. That is what I want. So we've seen these are the, so ultimately what you are now going to see is that the 12 AP is the only registration regime. ये 1023 CB खत्म हो जाएगा. 1046, 35, they are more specialized. So when you want to do charitable work, 12 AB is your go-to section. Now, I was talking about ATG. Please remember that ATG is meant for the donors. But many laws will say that before the donor can give funding, you must have ATG. Should you have ATG? Not necessary. You may not have, but many laws will say that there has to be an ATG with the not-for-profit before the donor can give donation, because the benefit of ATG goes to the donor. In CSR, the ATG benefit may not go to the donor because the CSR obligation is not ATG eligible. But anyway, that's another debate. So what I'm saying is that you need to have ATG. Now, I want to state here that and lot of confusion that the exemption here is regular for 5 years or 3 years. Now, the form number 10A is the one that I mentioned where you'll have to decide on your objects, and you will get a 10AC form either for regular registration or provisional registration. Okay. Now, once you complete that period, and please remember that for provisional registration, the registration has to be converted into regular registration within 6 months of commencement or charitable work, or 6 months before completion of 3 years in case you have not started charitable work. So if your organization is doing charitable work, then it is 6 months from the period that you got your provisional registration that you have to file. Now, at this stage, so that is what I've said. Understanding provisional and regular registration and related provision is very, very important. Now, I have seen many organizations which have got provisional registration and they were already charitable, but they kept telling me that we have to go for renewal or conversion of our provisional registration into regular registration only 6 months prior to 3 years. But they didn't see that it has to be within 6 months of commencement of charitable work, whichever is earlier. Now they are not able to get their provisional registration converted into regular registration because the Finance Act 2024 now said that post 30th June 2024, if you are in default, then you will have to first get condonation from the CIT after 1/10/2024 and then be able to get your regularization, which means that in a certain sense, your tax exemption is in limbo and you cannot get funds from donors. ये बहुत major drawback है with a lot of organizations. So unless you understand the nuances of the registration, gone are the days when you got your 12AA registration and you put it in a frame and put it in your office and forgot about it, and also at 10 ATG unless it was revoked. Nothing is permanent or perpetual in for not-for-profits now. even in the income tax law. Now, as far as renewal of registration is concerned, or conversion of provisional to regular, or modification of your object clause is concerned, this is all to be done in form number 10AB, and you will get what is called as form 10AD. Now, it is mandatory for organizations to know these provisions, because otherwise you will falter on the timeline and your status will become not tax exempt. Even many donors don't know these provisions. And when we go back to a lot of organizations saying that you are not tax exempt today, they are fighting with us. Please remember, when you get your a 12AB registration, you will get it in 10AC. So when they say form 10AC, you will give them 12AB. Please remember, you will even also your ATG approval. It's not registration, it's called approval. That also you will get in 10AC. So your form is 10AC only, but you will have to see below the form as you go down and read the form. Under, sorry, under which section of the Income Tax Act has this particular 10AC been approved? And sometimes even donors don't know that the 12AB and ATG are both 10AC. So they'll say, okay, one 10AC. Sometimes they will not even ask for the ATG approval 10AC. So it's not all everything that is known to everybody. But what I'm trying to say is that you must have a clear understanding. Similarly, when you get, for instance, your provisional 12AB registration converted into regular registration, you will also have to get your ATG converted to regular registration. And that will be in Form 10AD. Again, two Form ADs, two Form 10ADs, one for 12AB and one for ATG. Don't automatically assume that one Form 10AD, if it has been issued for 12AB, it will be valid for ATG also, ATG 5 also. No, it is not. So there are a lot of other changes that are there. I can only come give you an overview of what the registration related requirements are today. Moving on, each of these registrations will be unique to a particular section. And this is something that you must know. 12AB, separate section, separate registration. ATG, separate section, separate registration. The form number may be the same. Okay. Now, more than the getting the form is to understand what are the terms and conditions in these forms. So tomorrow go to your office and see your form 1080 AC, and there will be at least 10 to 15 conditions, terms and conditions in that form 10 AC. So when we teach statutory compliance, we take up the terms and conditions, but it is very important to see the terms and conditions because if you do not follow the terms and conditions, your certificate can be cancelled. And your certificate is cancelled means you are no longer a not for, you may be a not for profit entity, but you are no longer eligible for funding. You are no longer eligible for being tax exempt. Your income is not tax exempt. So it is very, very important to follow. And I can tell you the law relating to income tax as far as institutional area in terms of compliances or registrations is concerned, this is going to be the next big FCRA for not-for-profit organizations. So unless you have an understanding of the law, it will become very difficult. The second one is FCRA registration. So we are right now talking of 2A. 2A is registration and approvals related to a not-for-profit. So we have just done income tax in terms of exemption. We are not done in terms of compliances, in terms of reporting compliances under income tax. That's part B. तो हमारे पास 12AB कैसा है? How do we have the ATG, or if we have a 1023C approval, how does it look like? What is the period of validity of that? Have we taken the action for conversion of provisional to regular? Now, for instance, please remember that once the scheme came in, for the new regime came in force from 1/4/2021, your registrations are valid up to assessment year 2026-27, which means financial year 2025-26, which means that by 30th September of next year, all organizations which got their 12AB tax exempt registration will have to file application for renewal, and this time the renewal will be after due inquiry. So if your compliances in terms of reporting compliances, part B of section 2 that we are covering, are not of the right order, or if there are a lot of defaults, please mind that your registration renewal may have trouble, may have obstacles. So therefore, it is not just getting registrations. It's also in terms of understanding the reporting requirements and complying with the reporting requirements as required. डरना नहीं है, चैलेंज को फेस करना is what is डर के आगे जीत है. The second one is the FCRA registration. Here I've just mentioned 2-3 things. One is, please be mindful of the nature of activity that you have selected. Now, what I have said is there has to congruity, that is means symmetry, similarity between your charter, between your form 10A for income tax exemption, and for your in your form FC 3A or 3C. 3A is for registration, 3C is for renewal. So when you are filling up these forms, there has to be similarity in all these three forms in terms of the objects that you will pursue as per your charter is your charter. This is basically your uh, organizational document, okay, as which I call the charter. With your form 10A, which a lot of times we don't see, which was because that defines the charitable object, and also the FC forms which define your object. Now there has to be symmetry or consistency in the objects in all these documents and the work that you do on ground. This is very, very important. Sometimes we don't look at it, but I request that if you haven't looked at it, at least at the time of renewal, please have a look at it. The period of validity of registration is very important for FCRA, and that's essentially for a period of 5 years. So you can see that this 5-year registration for FCRA and 5-year registration for income tax, this income tax 5-year registration has come from the FCRA 5-year registration requirement. Okay, and the due process of inquiry. Now, the organizations of political nature is something which you have to be very mindful. Political parties, of course, are prohibited persons. So you have to know who are prohibited persons, and your activity should not be in the nature of party politics or political in nature. It can lead you into trouble in terms of cancellation, in terms of inquiry and cancellation. Public servants on your board, they are allowed. Public servants are allowed on board. They have been added in 2020. You can have public servants on the board, but please see that you do not give foreign contribution to board members unless they are also engaged in a different capacity with you. Okay. So these are the three things that I thought you have to look at as far as your FCRA registration is concerned. Now, coming to the other registrations are your EPF, ESI, Professional Tax and Shops and Establishments Act. Now, so you please look at your threshold. Now, before you look at that, you have to ensure that you have a HR policy. The HR policy defines who's an employee. The HR policy has a breakdown of compensation. Only then you will be able to fulfill the conditions relating to these particular statutes. These are two of the statutes, the EPF Act and the ESI Act are central statutes. The Professional Tax Act and the Shops and Establishment Act is our state acts. So first you will have to see. So coming to the Professional Tax Act, you will have to, so most states have Professional Tax Act, but a lot of them don't also have. For instance, I'm sitting in Rajasthan, Rajasthan doesn't have, Delhi doesn't have. So you'll have to see what is the Professional Tax, since it's a state act, is the Professional Tax Act applicable to you? And for your employees, you will have to abide by the Professional Tax Act in terms of deduction and deposit, periodicity of deposit. You'll have to decide, filing of annual returns, you'll have to see under the Professional Tax Act. Many organizations, despite the fact that there is state Professional Tax Act, are not complying, they are not registering, they are not deducting, they are not depositing. And that becomes a negative marking when the donors go, because they know whether the state Professional Tax Act is applicable to you or not. That is applicable. Many of the organizations where I go, they will say Professional Tax Act is not applicable. So I then take out the Professional Tax Act and say any kind of employment is covered under your state's Professional Tax Act. Why are you not complying? Then they will come back and say, well, we will see. Our CA told us not to comply, or our CA did not advise us. Your CA will not advise you, you have to advise yourself. Similarly, for the Shops and Establishment Act, now please see, we are no, you may not be dealing in goods, therefore you're not a shop. That is settled. But when you see the definition of establishment or commercial establishment in your state Shops and Establishment Act, please see whether you are exempt or not exempt. In many states, the Shops and Establishment Act is exempting charitable institution from the definition of commercial establishment. But where it is not, you will have to apply for and get a license for under the Shops and Establishment Act. So you'll have to again see the state act, see whether the charitable institution is given an exemption or not given an exemption. So these are the two state acts. Now coming to the EPF Act and the ESI Act. EPF Act is mandatory for not-for-profit organizations when they cross the threshold of 20 employees. Now these employees are both full-time as well as contractual, okay, regular as well as contractual. Although we normally look at EPF only for regular employees. And I would again say even compliance up to the point that you are complying for regular employees, once your employee strength crosses 20, you are supposed to get your registration done and you have to deduct EPF. But how will you deduct if you don't have your compensation breakdown? You will never be able to deduct. Why? Because the EPF deduction is to be made at the rate of 12% on your basic plus your HRA plus your fixed allowances. Even fixed allowances can be removed. It is basic plus HRA. Not-for-profits do not have HRA. Therefore, it is on basic. But if your basic is not defined in your compensation breakdown, how will you calculate 12% is the question. So you will have to first not only ensure the numbers, but you'll also have to ensure the compensation breakdown. सबसे important problem is because we do not have a compensation breakdown. We are not charging EPF. We are not compliant with the law. We are not able to charge it to the donor. So it's a catch-22 situation and we are defaulting on compliances with EPF Act. Everywhere we are in default. And the donor due diligence, we are getting a negative marking because we are saying, well, my employee strength is 30, 25, whatever, 22, but we are not complying with the EPF Act because you do not have the mechanism to comply with the EPF Act. Similarly for the ESI Act. Now, ESI Act is slightly different. There is some amount of grayness as to the applicability of ESI Act to not-for-profit organization, and therefore you can take benefit of that. However, once the labor codes are enacted, which may happen in March 2025, definitely ESI will be applicable to that. Distinction will go, and that will be applicable even for charitable organization. Currently, institutions which are doing educational and medical work are required to do ESI. But if you're not doing that as a charitable institution and you are also not a shop, probably you can escape ESI, although it is a very good social security benefit. It's a contributory benefit. So you are giving that benefit to that employee and the family of the employee uh, by his or her contribution, some contribution by the state, and a very little contribution actually for their family of the employee, and a lot of benefits. Okay, that's what I would want to say. So we are not, instead of debating on the applicability, I think it is good that we roll out that benefit as a contributory health insurance scheme to people who are eligible for that. For instance, EPF, the threshold is PF wages to 15,000, which might get increased to 25, and currently the or 21, and currently the ESI threshold is 21K. Beyond 21K, you will not be in part of the ESI, but you can go in for group mediclaim from normal insurance service providers, okay, or medical insurance service providers. So that's not what is mandatory. Okay. Again, I want to tell you. So ESI is mandatory up to 21K for those employees whose wages are 21K. EPF is wages up to 15K. But if people who are more than 15K threshold wages, they want to opt out, they can opt out as long as they're not members. So you must know you may be able to have very little compliance that may be required based on your examination of your staffs and their compensation, but you are complying with the law. The next one is NGO Darpan. Now the Darpan UIN, normally I have seen most organizations having. Okay, and that is the reason why about 3 lakh not-for-profit organizations are registered on Darpan out of an estimated 30 lakh not-for-profit organizations. Now, why do you need Darpan? Besides the fact that for government funding you need Darpan NGO, you need that also for FCRA. So FCRA will not allow you to proceed without the Darpan UIN, unique identification number. Many small medium organization uh, have some understanding of unique ID, but they really don't know, so they'll scramble here and there. I also want to tell you that when it comes to registration and approvals, please maintain a proper dashboard and documents record, instead of having to go here and there. That also is a negative marking for the organization from the donor's perspective. So FCRA, government funding, opening and operating bank account. Now, any bank which will open a bank account or make changes in your bank account, they will ask you, it is incumbent on the bank to see that you have a Darpan unique identification number under the PMLA. Okay, so the bank or financial institution will have it. Even for ATG approval, you will need the NGO Darpan. So moving on to the registrations or approvals as part of the statutory and regulatory compliance. So uh, some of those we had already seen. Now, right now, what we are seeing is the obtaining of a PAN and a TAN, okay, the permanent account number and the tax deduction and collection account number. What is very important is that many small and medium organizations are not conversant with the TDS provisions of the Income Tax Act and therefore are not taking TAN, even though they are showing reasonable size balance sheets. So whether organizations understand the intricacies, PAN they will get, okay, they take PAN. But as far as TDS is concerned, is something, because PAN is for payment of taxes and TAN is for deduction and collection. So we normally, as not-for-profits, we don't collect tax. We only deduct tax for specific sections of the Income Tax Act, which are more particularly applicable to not-for-profit organizations. So do we have a TAN? If we do not, many organizations just say we don't need a TAN. And if you see their balance sheets and their books, there are many vendors where their dealing is crossing the threshold as far as services are concerned, more specifically services are concerned, where TDS is applicable. And we all know that short or non-deduction of TDS also makes that expenditure unallowable to the extent of 30% of that total expenditure. Okay. Interest penalty, that is separate. What it also does is that expenditure is not allowed from your as application when we compute your total 85% application. Okay. Now, as far as PAN is concerned, is the big difference sometimes that we have found is that the PAN the incorporation of the constitution date is not matching with the constitution documents. So you should be very clear or you must double check that the date of incorporation or constitution mentioned in PAN is the same date as the date of constitution or incorporation in your constitution document. Okay. For Section 8 companies, the SIN, that is the company identification number, the PAN and the TAN are included, are mentioned in the certificate of incorporation by default. Okay. So the PAN and the TAN are two. PAN, everybody knows. TAN, most of small, medium organizations are not compliant with TDS, and that's a big red flag. So one has to be very clear about what is, the provisions relating to TDS. Are they applicable to us in terms of TDS deduction and therefore the regulatory compliance, which we will see. The next one is the GST identification number or the GST registration. Very important to understand what is incidental business activity as far as a charitable institution is concerned. So we've seen the section 215 when we were talking about what is the cause that a donor will fund. So we had seen section 215 where there are several objects. Now, as far as there are total 7 objects. The first 6 are specific objects and you can have incidental business there. And the 7th object has business incidental activity or commercial activity, but it is capped at 20% of your total receipts. Now you have to see what is incidental business and are you doing commercial activity which is incidental business. Number one. Number two, if you are doing that and you are crossing the threshold for goods and services, mostly services, which is 40 lakhs, which is 20 lakhs, then in that case, the threshold will be crossed and you will be required to get your GST registration and you will have to charge GST. So it's very important to understand what is taxable supply, what is incidental business, and the threshold for registration or applicability of GST. Okay, 20 lakhs for services and 40 lakhs for goods. Now, it's important also to know what is the exemption for charitable activities. So the mega notification 12/2017 of 2017 when the act came into force is the notification that you'll have to refer to if you can claim that there is complete exemption from GST. Now, there are two conditions that have to be complied with if you want uh, complete exemption. Otherwise, once you cross the threshold and your business incidental activity crosses threshold, you need to get GST registration. One is that the organization is registered under Section 12. And the second one, which is more important, is that you are undertaking charitable activity as defined in the GST. Now, it's the definition of charitable is very, very narrow compared to what is there in the Income Tax Act or elsewhere. The GST provides for definition of charitable activity. And if you are fulfilling both those conditions, only then you can say that you are GST exempt under the mega notification 12/2017. Now, it's very important to understand what is commercial activity. Okay, because commercial activity cannot be any commercial activity. It is only incidental business which will promote your main object that will be considered as good enough. Otherwise, you will be actually playing with your charitable status. Okay, and you might have problems where the business or commercial activity is considered not incidental and therefore pure commercial and may actually lead to cancellation of your 12AB registration. So it's very, very important. Now, more so important for CSR funding, okay? Because the corporates do not have an understanding of CSR and we are supposed to educate them also. So what I have mentioned here is that GST should not be taken, and that is the big compulsion that NGOs come with us to us, saying that the corporate is saying that you have to get a GST identification number or GST in, only then they will give a contract. Please remember, any CSR funding should be treated as a grant, okay, and not as a service agreement or a service contract. And this is for us to understand and explain, because the corporate understands the commercial language only. They don't understand our kind of position, our kind of status, our kind of the framework in which we work. What is the boundary of our framework? They don't understand. So Otherwise, what happens is if they set it up as a service contract and they ask you to raise invoices, it's a taxable supply. Okay. And if it becomes taxable supply, then there is an implication of GST and there is also an implication of TDS, because then since it's a contract, it's a consulting contract, they will charge, they will deduct TDS. Again, if there's TDS, it gets reported in your 26AS as TDS. And when you claim the refund of TDS, the department is going to find out what is this TDS for. If it were for rent or it were for interest, understood. But if it is for services, are we, are grants to be treated as services? No, grants are trust. Grant is a trust money, but we have to explain it so that we don't get into the, the purview of GST. Now, the next registration, so what I'm saying is GST in is not a requirement. I'm only giving you the full list of possible registrations and approvals that may be required by a not-for-profit. You have to see what is applicable and how much can you do in a year-to-year basis. That's exactly what I had told you. You need to make a plan to see that you are able to, wherever it is required, are able to fulfill that plan over a period of maybe 1 year or 2 years, as the case may be with your organization. But there has to be a clear roadmap for registrations and approvals, because that's something that is very key as far as a donor is concerned when they do their due diligence. The next one is, of course, CSR1. And this, that if you want to get CSR funds from corporates who are liable, who are eligible, not liable, who are required by the CSR law. That's the section 135 of the Companies Act 2013, that they have to bring in 2% of their average net profits in the last 3 years as CSR funding. So you are eligible for CSR funding, but you need to get your CSR1. Now, many organizations are still not aware that they need to get a URN for by filing form CSR1 on MCA portal post 1/4/2021, and no corporate is going to give you CSR fund money. It doesn't cost. It's a simple one-page form. The second thing that you need to understand as far as CSR is concerned is who is eligible to be a implementing agency. And that's what is called as implementing agency in CSR. So we are eligible as implementing agencies, but our eligibility is subject to one, that we are a public, charitable institution. Number two, we are 12 AB and 80G registered. And the third is that we should have a 3-year track record. Now, this is something that you need to understand before you go to the corporates. Other portions are different. Local area preference, as I have mentioned here. I mean, is there a geographic preference that corporate gives, and are we in that geography and we have a better chance of getting that fund? Is a separate matter. But we need to understand what is the requirement relating to being eligible for funding besides getting the URN. Next, if your employee strength is more than 30, the act says both regular as well as contractual, then you need to comply with the Apprenticeship Act of 1961, which says that between 2.5% to 15% of your workforce has to be by way of trainees or apprentices or interns, and you need to get the contract for those apprentices registered with the appropriate authority. Now, most organizations might not have to comply because their employee strength may not be 30, but I'm just saying that this is also becoming an important factor because the government's thrust is on, training, apprenticeship, and the Prime Minister apprenticeship scheme that was announced, and of course the National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme, the NAPS, that is already there for several years now. So if you are, falling under the purview of, there is voluntary compliance, there is compulsory compliance. I am saying compulsory compliance is more than 30. 4 to 29 is voluntary, less than 4 is not even voluntary. So one has to also understand what is the Apprenticeship Act. We are hiring, engaging apprentices. They are a good resource, but we also need to understand the statutory registration part of such engagement. The last, of course, is the registration on the social stock exchange. I don't know how many of you know that a not-for-profit organization can get registered on the social stock exchange. And there are two social stock exchanges in this country. One, the National Stock Exchange, and the second is the Bombay Stock Exchange. I would like to mention that close to 100 not-for-profit organizations are already registered on the National Stock Exchange, and about 30 to 40 crores of funds have been mobilized through securities by not-for-profit organizations. So this also was, introduced in 2019, and the social stock exchanges are working. So you can do either registration and not get your securities listed, don't go to the market. But if you are registering, the advantage is that from the donor's perspective, the registration does a check mark as far as due diligence is concerned, because your registration on the social stock exchange is after a process of due diligence by the social stock exchange. Now, this helps the donors to to see that, to feel that, well, if it is registered, some other authority has already done the due diligence. Now, registering, I'm not getting into the mechanics of the social stock exchange. The registration is for a period of 1 year and it has to be renewed. Okay. And you can also list your securities, or you can raise money by issuing securities. The current security that is available in the stock exchange is what is called as the zero coupon, zero principal, or the ZCZP instrument, where a lot of these, some close to about 10 to 15 organizations have raised about 20 to 30 crores of rupees from the issue of these securities. So this is also one way that you can go to the open public and raise small amounts of money, okay, by listing your securities for specific project, okay, that's also possible. So you can get yourself registered. The registration requirement also entails a certain reporting that we'll see. So I have come to the end of the first part of compliance, which is registrations and approvals. Am I saying that you please go and tomorrow and apply to the social stock exchange for registration, get the link and register yourself? No, I am only saying this is also an avenue which gives credibility to you in terms of donor due diligence, because the donors feel more comfortable that a certain other agency has already done the due diligence, because your registration is not uh, automatic. It is after a process of compliance with the regulations related to registrations that has been laid down by the Securities and Exchange Board of India. So I just want to recap. The takeaway is that donor due diligence is a very serious matter and requires a lot of planning and readiness. We have seen what donor due diligence is, and then we have come to the meat of the donor due diligence, which is the constitution related area that donors look at and what they look at. And right now, what we are studying is the statutory, regulatory, related compliance, related area of an institution, where we were looking at the registration compliance, not the reporting compliance, but the registration related matters which an organization must have for the donor to check box. Now, when we'll do the checklist, I think that will help you also to have that checklist ready and have your document and your register or documents ready, so that you can provide them to the donor and be more ready for that. So that's what is the takeaway. We have several other sections to do, which is the completing the registration approval areas, the reporting compliances, both for registration, constitution, mission, vision, your governance, your policies and procedures. And I actually tell you why is it and what is it that the donors are looking at in these institutional areas. Visibility and reputational, very, very important. We pay scant attention to that. For donors, that's more fashion. That's more something that gives them the wow, actually, as far as due diligence is concerned, which we just don't look at. Anyway, so this is as far as today's session is concerned. Thank you very much for your
Thank you, sir. Thank
participation.
you.
Have
Thank
a
you very
great
much.
day. Have a good weekend, and see you next Friday at the same time at 3 p.m.